What's up everybody, Brian here with BPS Customs, and today I have kind of an impromptu video for you. I actually wasn't going to do this video at first because more people asked me to put this card in a blender than to do a review on it. Well, I'm not going to do that, but I did do some testing. I want to show you guys the results. So this is the GTX 1050 Ti review. Now, I don't actually have a script for this video, so I'm just going to kind of have to do it off the cuff. Now, what I actually have here is not a reference design, but there actually is no reference design for the 1050 Ti. Now, what Nvidia actually did for this product was they developed a GP107 chip, which is in direct contrast to what I actually thought was going to happen. As far as the 1060 goes, they've actually decided to go with a completely new chip, the GP106. It's likely that we'll see the GP106 chip again when Nvidia releases their GTX 1050 sometime this year. This actually kind of goes against the history of their graphics card releases, where traditionally they've used a cut down version of the higher grade card in order to make the lower grade cards. So you would assume that the GTX 1060's GP106 chip would be used in a 1050 Ti as well. Not the case. They actually developed an entirely new chip, the GP107, just for this card right here. The 1050 Ti has 768 CUDA cores and 4 gigs of GDDR5 memory. The superclock version I have here runs at a base clock of 1354 MHz and a boost clock of 1468 MHz. This is slightly higher than some, but actually not the top end GTX 1050 Ti that you could find. There are plenty out there that come with beefier coolers, extra power delivery, and run the boost and base clocks a little bit higher right out of the box. Of course, the 1050 Ti has compatibility with all the new generation APIs like DirectX 12 and Vulkan, as well as older standards like OpenGL 4.5. As we go down NVIDIA's product stack, we definitely notice that the video outs on these cards actually get significantly less robust as we go from the 1080 all the way down to the 1050. Now, the 1050 Ti offers a DVI, an HDMI 2.0, and a DisplayPort 1.4. This is pretty similar to the situation offered on the 1060, but obviously is a lot less than you find on the 1070 and 1080. Honestly, unless you're driving multiple monitors, which you honestly can do with the 1050 Ti, it does support up to 3 monitors, it doesn't really matter the display outputs that you have as long as the one that you want to use your monitor with is supported. And the 1050 Ti does offer both HDMI and DisplayPort as well as the legacy DVI port, so you should be covered no matter what your monitor situation really is. The first thing that you notice about this card though is that it is small. This card is actually smaller than even the RX 460 that I tested in this video up here. Now, something for prospective buyers to keep in mind is that this card actually does not require an additional 6-pin power connector like most other cards in this class. That means that it's drawing less than 75 watts total, which the PCIe slot can provide. Now, while this does mean that overclocking on this card might be slightly limited, you'll see in my testing later that I was able to dial in an overclock that produced measurable results in my testing. But regardless of its size, people really want to know, how does this card perform? Is it going to be worth my $150 or so? Well, considering that this card comes in at $150, I figured it only made sense to put this card up against its closest competitors price-wise, which are actually the RX 460 and the RX 470 from Team Red. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a GTX 1050 to compare it against, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to include the GTX 1060 results in these tests as well. Now, even though I expect the GTX 1060 to pretty handily outperform the rest of the cards in our testing, it'll give us a nice point of comparison to the GTX 1050 Ti. Let's take a look at how this card stacks up against other cards in its price range and even a little bit above. Now recently when people ask me for a recommendation for a graphics card and they have $100 or $150 to spend, I've been steering them in the direction of the RX 460. And especially with the recent price drop from AMD, you could get that card at a steal. The 2GB versions are available for under $100 retail right now. The 1080p performance of that card is certainly adequate, but sometimes people still fall into that budget class and want a little more graphics horsepower. That's where this card comes in. It's kind of slotting right in the middle between Nvidia's higher end cards and AMD's lower end cards. It'll serve a segment of the population that wants a little more eye candy at 1080p, but doesn't really have the bucks to shell out for an RX 480 or a GTX 1060. This card is a very happy middle ground for a lot of people, and I think that Nvidia has kind of hit the nail on the head offering this card at $150. It seems to be priced correctly. So what do you guys think of the GTX 1050 Ti? Is it worth your $150? Should you spend a little bit less, get a 1050 or an RX 460? Or maybe spend a little bit more and go for like an RX 470 or even a GTX 1060. It's a dilemma that a lot of people are going to face in the upcoming year until the next generation of graphics cards is announced. It's not a bad dilemma to have. There are now offerings at price points ranging from $100 all the way up to $300 in fairly regular increments. When Pascal was first announced, the only cards that were available were super expensive. And even with the introduction of the GTX 1060, there was a large segment of the population that still couldn't afford the next generation graphics cards. AMD jumped right into that space and started selling a bunch of cards at a price target that Nvidia couldn't really touch. Well, they've kind of rectified that. The GP107 chip, the GTX 1050, and the GTX 1050 Ti slot right into some price targets that Nvidia has been lacking some activity in for a long time. I'll definitely be looking to do a build with this card sometime in the future. Maybe something around the $450 or $500 total price range. So definitely get subscribed to the channel if you want to see something like that. Also leave me a comment down below letting me know what you think of this card. As always guys, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next video.